Welcome to today's Inspire series. My name is Hannah Lancaster. I am a consultant with Bridge Innovate here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And today we are talking to Strat Parrott, who I will introduce a little bit further in a minute, but he is going to be talking about crafting an elegant customer experience.
Hello, everybody.
Right, yeah. So if you are new to the Inspire series, this is a webinar series that we put on at Bridge to share all the insights and wonderful thoughts and inspiration that come from the connections that we have around the world. And Strat Parrott is one of them. We are so excited to bring him here today. If you don't know anything about Strat, you will soon find out plenty. He is a really amazing CX designer, and we're really excited to bring him on. So currently he is a VP design director at First Horizon, and he has a background in working for agencies and freelancing as an illustrator and designer. He has always been a creator with an insight for how things connect with people. So over the years, he's been working with marketing firms and ad agencies to develop his experiences and help students transition into their career in design and marketing. And then he's worked in CX design for a while and is now living in Memphis, Tennessee. He's originally from Chattanooga. Is that correct, Strat?
That is correct.
Yeah, so we have a big background in Chattanooga together, and he has been a friend of Bridge for a long time. So I will let him continue to introduce himself, and we are so excited to have him here and to have you guys engaged in this conversation as well. So take it away, Strat.
So yeah, thank you, Hannah, and thank you everyone on the call for joining us today. I see several familiar names in here from Chattanooga folks that I have known throughout the years. So I'm excited to hopefully be able to share this conversation and really maybe help some people grow their understanding of what customer experience is as an organizational tool, as well as the customer experience from a tactical standpoint and something that everyone is a part of. So, hopefully through this conversation, we'll kind of uncover some of those things that will lead us to discussion about what will craft or what can be the beginnings of crafting great customer experience.
Great. Yeah, so, customer experience is such a buzzword. I feel like this is an industry that has been growing substantially in the last few years, and people always hear CX, UX. So can you give us the foundation about what customer experience is and maybe what the difference is between user experience and customer service and sort of where this all sort of lies within the playing field together?
So there are several different schools of thought and ways in which customer experience organizations can grow inside a company or organization. They can oftentimes kind of come up through a call center or customer contact center team, which is really a little more tactical and really can kind of base itself around just collecting customer issues and issue resolution and things like that. It can also come from kind of more of a marketing context where it's trying to just look at some of the holistic overview of client onboarding and acquisition and things of that nature. And then it can also be a piece of, the digital experience. So it's a little bit different inside some startup organizations or smaller organizations, and then it presents differently in enterprise situations. So the long and short of that is customer experience really looks over the whole picture of a client's experience and that client journey from end to end. So that's from pre-acquisition to servicing and things after. Other buzzwords or I guess jobs or work to be done that you might hear about, like service design, user experience design. Those are things that often are either inside or a part of the whole customer experience process. Some might even say that service design kind of is the next step above customer experience. Personally, I kind of think they play in tandem with each other and look across organizations at all touch points across an organization, as well as all product level pieces and all the way down to business processes and, organizational structure. So
Right. I mean, that
that's
provides a lot of clarity, but
a
I
lot.
think, something that's great about it is that it's so customizable, is
Mhm,
that it's not just for like one industry. It's not just for like one type of position, like what you were saying about it being sort of across the spectrum of all different types of agencies. And I think that's something that does get lost because it's so broad, so I think this is what this conversation is
mhm,
going to help me and everyone do is kind of what kind of takes that forward into making a little bit more of a niche prospect. That's something that people can like take on.
mhm. So oftentimes with customer experience, when you're looking at all across all touch points, you're really looking for moments that matter or inflection points throughout that journey to really focus on ways to improve the experience overall or as a whole. And that can be presented in many different ways at the product level, at the in-person level, with one-to-one communications with frontline employees or staff, as well as like some of the environmental aspects that customers experience when they walk into a physical location. So you're not just looking at the digital journey, you're also looking at the physical journey, the asynchronous parts of a client experience and communication that might happen, and how to improve those. So really you have to work to identify those. So a customer experience organization kind of helps or should be helping work with all different departments, lines of business to really help not only identify some of those customer pain points, but to help kind of prioritize and build on each one of those pain points to try and improve them. You may not always solve 100% for what those issues could be, but you can always iteratively improve on them. So from my perspective, the first thing that you do is come to it from a place of understanding. So you want to first understand the problem, understand the language within the organization. So a lot of different organizations will have, they may have different vocabulary and different language among each one of the cross-functional teams that have some of the same implications. So there are things that often come up like journeys, customer journeys, client journeys, whatever, different types of mapping tools that can be used. These are all things that may kick off a different type of tactic or a different process for each team, ultimately leading to the same goals. And really what it does is really just adds a different lens to the problem that you're trying to solve. So a customer experience team should be able to work with all those teams to help look across the organization, across the teams, and be able to help kind of analyze and filter some of that information to really be able to focus on the best things.
Right. And kind of leverage the strengths of each department and sort of where those touch points are for the customer. I know there's something you had said about before we have chatted about how customer experience is always happening, whether or not you're planning it. Like you can't avoid it. It's happening throughout the entire process. Like if you have somebody who is using your products or your services, like it is happening whether or not you are intentionally planning it. So it's something that can be like grabbed and again leveraged, for the benefit of the company and the organization. So can you talk a bit more about that too, and sort of the best ways to kind of get started?
Yeah, so I mean, the experience can always be improved, and as you mentioned, that one of the things I like to say is that the experience is everywhere, whether or not you plan it. So if you're thinking from even the small local business that has a brick and mortar, from the time that they put up a sign and unlock the door, and their first customer walks in, there's an experience to be had there, and it can be planned and structured, or it can be unplanned and unstructured, but it still exists. So one of the best things that you can do, and it's very much a marketing tactic, a sales tactic, it goes back to this thing where I was mentioning about language and context, is that you have to first understand your clients. You have to empathize. You have to seek first to understand. So I think that's the best place where you can start with any customer experience. Additionally, there's also kind of the cliche or moniker in this industry that the customer experience is only as good as the employee experience. So how do you also make sure to plan and engage with employees to make sure that their experience, either with the tools that they have access to or their environments or things, are positive and uplifting, to in turn translate to a positive uplifting experience for your clients.
Yeah, that's a very great point. I like that a lot. And so when you get this information, so say you've been interviewing customers, you've been getting surveys, you've been getting this information. What do you do with it to really get the stakeholder buy-in needed for like these larger companies? Like where do you see those challenges lying?
So, I mean, again, I'm going to take it back to language and really opening communication. So, some of the challenges that you're presented with as a CX team, especially in a larger organization, is really being able to communicate across the company with those stakeholders. It's almost like each subset or group within an organization has their own culture, even though a company may have its own overall culture. Product teams, lines of business, just different individuals, they're coming at things from different points of view. So you really have to be able to take a stance, become a storyteller, and share the stories of the client experience through a lens that may help them better understand. Like, you can't just come in and say, these are the problems, these are the pain points, and here's how we solve them. It seems like it would be that simple, but oftentimes that will be met with challenges, just mostly because in every organization, and maybe that's a really broad stretch, but in many organizations, change, and just change for humans, is generally met with some apprehension and some challenge, right? So what you're doing is a piece of change management. So you're kind of coming in, you're identifying some issues, you're kind of helping bridge that gap, and doing some gap analysis. And, it's not always up to the CX organization to present the solution,
Right.
but it's to maybe present some possible solutions of how they could work together. Also identifying and showing things, oftentimes visually, but not always, to different teams, so that they can really understand how to better work together. One of the biggest tools that we use oftentimes are client journeys or service design blueprints, where it really visualizes the overall process, and then where some other teams may have touch points throughout the whole client journey. And what we find is oftentimes teams are so focused in on their piece that they don't think about how what they're doing affects the other parts of the whole.
Right.
So what we have to do is try and encourage, from a cultural standpoint, to think differently, to think more collectively. And that can also be a difference in CX globally, so if you're thinking contextually and you're taking like a Eurocentric or a US centric view on things, where the culture of like a nation is more individualistic, then you have totally different views than you do in working with Asian cultures, where there may be a more homogenistic view, where a context is placed on things over objects. So you can really get into building different communication styles internally across the organization. So setting that language piece is very important. Setting up the taxonomies and the semantics between how things are used is very important. I always say that it's like when you have a course in college or a course in school, especially a science class, the very first thing they start with is vocabulary. So it's vocabulary to set things up so that you understand what's being talked about in the context of whatever it is that you're trying to learn about.
Right. It sounds like establishing that why is like a really huge point, and what that looks like across different departments, and what you're saying too about the individualisticness of the way that some departments operate, I think is really interesting, because I think when you show those visuals, like that journey map, then that kind of almost empowers people to think like, oh, my job is important in the whole structure of this journey for this experience. And like, this is the power that my position has. And this is how I can begin to work outside of my silo. And I think that that is a huge benefit to the company for even taking on CX to begin with, not like, let alone like the impact it can have on their product or their service.
Right. I mean, the biggest help a lot of times within organizations can be that visualization piece. I know I'm not showing a ton of slides or anything. I feel like in such a short time frame like this, it doesn't really add any value to the conversation, which is funny since I'm about to talk about how visuals are important. When you're trying to establish that, especially with internal stakeholders, again, you've got teams that may be siloed. And one of the best ways to break that silo, show that they're a part of the whole, is to visualize that for them.
Right.
A lot of times when you're working on a better customer experience, one of the things is time. How can you deliver your service or product faster and better? Everybody always wants faster and better and cheaper. There's that kind of moniker too. If you can pick two, good, fast, and cheap, pick two. But if you're trying to close those gaps and close that timeline, there's a big difference between seeing something written that says it takes a really long time and seeing that it takes a really long time. So really, once somebody sees that visually, and then especially if you can align it to other processes that might show things that are happening in parallel during that time period, then it can help you gain efficiencies. Where if you just start seeing it all written out, it's really hard to follow maybe where they fall into a timeline.
Yeah. Right. I think that also brings I'll have 2 points. There's so much understanding in, again, seeing these processes that are aligning, and then the culture amongst that, when you're waiting for this department to like hurry up and make that decision, then you can see maybe what be that frustration and where that happens, which is a good touch point for like developing new culture. But then I liked your point about possibly bringing a couple solutions to the forefront, but that it's not up to the CX team to just like come in and solve all the problems and just like hand the solutions over to these departments to execute. And I think again that is a really beautiful part of the CX is the camaraderie and empowerment of teams to come together to develop the solutions and what that looks like across the team. What are some of the challenges that you've seen in your work in kind of maintaining CX? Like once you get it going, there's not really an endpoint, what you were saying is like a lot of iterations. So what are some of the challenges that you've seen in like maintaining and like implementing these processes once you're like ready to go to market and like change these scenarios and change?
So it's always just it comes from an educational place, I think. The challenge that I see is that it's always continuous education, re-education of teams and team members, because just like anything, CX, when you have an organizational overview to it, we're focused on one thing, which is that overall customer experience and getting these different teams to talk to and work together. They're working on multiple projects at a time. Oftentimes it's really easy for teams to drop back into their silos, drop back into their groups, especially if you're working with a distributed or a decentralized model. So sometimes you may have a CX practitioner and user experience designers, or different types of designers that fall into the product level. So they're like in different teams rather than being a design organization that people come to or a CX organization that people come to. Right. It's like the focus is on one line of business at a time. I think that's a pretty good model. It's definitely very scalable in a larger organization, but oftentimes even those groups can have challenges in coming back and talking to each other. So I feel like a slightly hybrid model is having an organization that either CX or a design organization that really kind of stands to be the governance piece of things. So where those distributed teams can kind of come back and say, hey, like we're making sure that these things are aligning with other teams, or are you seeing things happen in other teams that are affecting each other? Because sometimes they still forget to talk. If the cross functionality is just within one product, but you have 15 products, then you have 15 separate teams, and those product teams may not be talking to each other.
Yeah,
So those are challenges that can often happen in a larger organization. In a smaller organization, it can sometimes it can be like too much involvement all at once, and you just get focused on all of the innovation and innovation ideas in the future states, and do not focus on your current like as is states, what's happening right now for clients in the place where they are.
Point. Yeah, because you almost get too excited about it. There's like too many cooks in the kitchen. So I think aligning for, what that process looks like and really setting those milestones and the change is really key. Just for the matter of time, I want to see if anyone has questions. So if anyone wants to pop a question into the chat or into the Q&A box for Strat to answer.
While people are thinking of questions or typing them out, one thing that I do want to mention too is that one of the most important things in driving a CX transformation can be working with your digital teams, with your digital transformation teams. It's a very important part of the overall transformation or stand up of an organization inside of a company. And then also driving that culture piece. So looking for curiosity and risk taking. It's kind of interesting in looking at things from the perspective of coming from a startup and entrepreneurial background where risk taking is pretty much the name of the game, right? You want to jump off a cliff, build a plane on the way down, figure it out as you're going. Moving into banking, it's much more risk averse. Some larger organizations, it's much more risk averse. So you have to almost reteach people how to be comfortable, not with failure, but even with being curious. So like an example, as I see Jake has asked a question, but like just in starting this with the chat not being enabled, Jake looked for other ways within the system to be able to let us know that that was an issue. He didn't have your phone number. He didn't have my phone number. He used the question and answers option to say, hey, there's a problem in the chat's not working.
Right.
So that's using creative curiosity. And from what I know about Jake, because I do know him, like that's Jake in a nutshell. He looks for solutions to problems. He's a creative problem solver. So we got a couple of questions over there. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. So Jake said, any suggestions for selling old school management on the importance of investing in or building a culture of CX/UX?
So it is not a quick win. It is not a fast uptick. The best thing that you can do is try and bring them along through co-creation processes and methodologies that you use through trying to build that culture. So what that means is really trying to, extend that handshake, get time with that management style and bring them into the process. Even if that's for 10 or 15 minutes at a time, you're not going to be able to take them off to Brainstorm Island very often and do 2 days of workshops and really solve a problem. But you may be able to introduce them to the pieces that they can really get buy-in
right
around.
That's something.
So it's know your audience like anything. You've got to know your audience. Again, back to the first thing I said, you can apply it to clients. You can apply it to your internal stakeholders. Is you have to seek first to understand. So understand what their challenges, their learning styles are, their communication styles. And then that is how you leverage the importance of investing in anything.
Right. Perfect. So Jared also said the department has a rather new CX team. As a new member to the new department, how would one develop the paradigm shift to a hybrid model?
I am not sure particularly how to approach that question. I'd need a little bit more context to it. So I can relate it to our team. Our team is pretty new and very small. So we're only 6 people that is responsible for trying to connect across teams and filtering this information out. We are also a part of the greater marketing team and working with our insights and analytics partners. they're a team about the same size. So I guess you could really say our CX team is about 12 people. And then we work towards pulling those analytics in and then communicating them across the teams. But we don't have that hybrid integrated at the product level or journey team model.
Mhm.
To really get that implemented, again, it's something that can happen and probably will happen over a much longer period of time. It really depends on the size of your organization, the level of culture and cultural maturity that the organization has, and the stance that you can take with other departments. So again, like, I think you have to look at what an organization is focusing on as a whole. So if they're looking for digital transformation, for example, which was pushed heavily by COVID, but in and of itself, digital transformation is another kind of buzzword.
Mhm.
But oftentimes it's got more backing behind it, and CX and user experience can be a big part of getting that digital transformation in play. So it's
Right.
really networking, leveraging the right partners inside your organization. And it may not be at the level that you're at. If you're just a senior user experience designer, you really have to also try and raise the importance of having design leadership within an organization. You don't have to have a title to be a leader. You just have to really take hold and try and drive some of those principles and approach everything from a teaching or coaching standpoint throughout the organization.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. So Jessica Rayomi has a question too. It says, I'm currently working on building a customer success program in a startup. Do you have any specific tips for building this program from the ground up?
So I think for this, oftentimes just when I see the words customer success or customer success program, where I feel like that diverges and is again, it's a part of the overall customer experience, is that falls oftentimes into a customer service or customer success program, where that becomes typically one touch point for
Mm,
customers to engage with problem solving, and it's kind of a recovery method. So developing that from the ground up, I think probably one of the most important pieces there, especially at a startup, is making sure, and sometimes it's actually easier at a startup, but making sure that your data points and data collection are available to other parts of the organization. And so that will not only help in the small part in the beginnings of standing up a customer success program, but that'll help other teams gain visibility into some of the pain points that customers are having, and potentially be able to address them more quickly
right.
with greater success. So I think that when you're in a startup and you have the ability from the ground up to really develop your data pools, your data ocean, like where you're pulling all this data from, that's a lot better place to be than a large scale organization that's been building all of this data over time, and it can be in very, very disparate places.
Right. Yeah, that's a great call out, because again, that kind of helps also with that startup culture, it's like getting all these departments together and empowered to buy into this together, I think is a really important step. Does anyone else have any questions? Jessica says, thank you. Thank you, Jessica. So let me share my screen, and we have some ways to connect with Strat a little bit further if you have further questions, because we always have questions for Strat. He has the best answers. So this is Strat's website, email, and LinkedIn. If you would like to connect with him, feel free to email him questions and thoughts, feedback from the webinar. And this will also be posted on our YouTube if you want to go back and listen again to any of the points that he made. I think the customer experience is so exciting to me. I think it's one of the, it's something that seems so obvious, right? That it's like, this is, what we all are experiencing all the time. Like there's been multiple times, even this week, where I'm like, as a customer, this experience sucks. Like, I wish there was like a CX team, like whenever there's a survey, I'm filling that stuff out. And I just think it's such powerful work. And I think there's just so much more to be said about it too. So thanks for
It's
hopping on.
difficult. It's definitely much more complex than you can shove into 30 minutes. But
Yeah,
hopefully this has gained some starting points for some people, a little bit of insight. Again, there's lots of different schools of thought around CX as a function, and then customer experience as, you know, a tactic or a thing that's done. You know, everybody is responsible for the customer experience, but you know, who is kind of in charge of helping maintain that customer experience and that consistency across departments throughout the organization, and thinking about it more holistically.
right, right. Well, yeah, I totally agree. And I think maybe this is just a part one of this discussion, because I know that there's like, 50 other topics that we could go into. I mean, even about the change management piece, I think is really huge too. So we'll have to jump on again another time and talk about that. But everyone, thanks for being here. Oh, let's do one more question. Strat, do you have a second to answer this
Yeah,
one?
yeah, absolutely.
There's a time when client wanted a particular product feature for KPI tracking, but customers were not in favor of that feature based off of focus group discussion. How common are these conflicts in the innovation world?
So it's innovation world is a little bit back towards some of my old consulting days outside of First Horizon, and outside of the banking world. However, in many of the organizations that I've worked in, I have seen this problem come up many times, where basically stakeholders decide that, you know, they haven't talked to customers, they haven't gathered that customer feedback or insight, and they've decided that the solution or the thing they want to do is provide a new feature, right? And then they spend all of this time, effort, and resources in standing up a new feature, only to find that it falls flat and it's not used.
Right.
So, you know, that's a place where I think it's important to really take those focus groups and show people how important it is. You know, that's an opportunity, I think, to pull those stakeholders into a co-creation process or a co-listening process, not just giving them a report. There's a lot that's lost in just saying, we interviewed a focus group, we've got this survey back from our clients, and it says they don't need this feature, they want the features they have to work properly.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to focus on making those features that we have currently work properly before we add a new feature, or before we send them down a path of another experience that's potentially bad.
Right. It's like
So
developing that empathy point again. It's different when you're showing somebody data versus them seeing and hearing the conversation happening, and like hearing about the actual physical experience that people are having when they're using that service or product. So yeah,
right.
that's a great question. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for being here. Again, this will be on our YouTube under Bridge Innovate. And thanks, Strat, for your time this morning. And again, his information is up here on the screen if you guys want to get in contact with him. I'm sure we'll have another episode of CX Design with Strat coming up soon. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.